Arrangements of morphemes. A morpheme is defined as the minimal, meaningful unit of a language. In a word such as independently, the morphemes are said to be in, depend, and li, pend as the bound root, and the other morphemes are, in this case, derivational affixes. In words such as dogs, dog is the root and the s is an inflectional morpheme. In its simplest and most naive form, this way of analyzing word forms, called item and arrangement, treats words as if they were made of morphemes put after each other, concatenated, like beads on a string. More recent and sophisticated approaches, such as distributed morphology, seek to maintain the idea of the morpheme while accommodating non-concatenated, analogical, and other processes that have proven problematic for item and arrangement theories. And similar approaches. Morpheme-based morphology presumes three basic axioms. Both ones, single morpheme, hypothesis, roots and affixes, have the same status as morphemes. Bloomfield's sign base, morpheme, hypothesis, as morphemes. They are dualistic signs, since they have both phonological form and meaning. Bloomfield's lexical morpheme, hypothesis, morphemes, affixes, and roots alike are stored in the lexicon. Morpheme-based morphology comes in two flavors, one Bloomfieldian and one Hockett'ian. For Bloomfield, the morpheme was the minimal form with meaning, but did not have meaning itself. For Hockett, morphemes are meaning elements, not form elements. For him, there is a morpheme plural using allomorphs such as s, n and ren. Within much morpheme-based morphological theory, the two views are mixed in unsystematic ways, so a writer may refer to the morpheme plural and the morpheme s in the same sentence. Lexeme-based morphology. Lexeme-based morphology usually takes what is called an item and process approach. Instead of analyzing a word form as a set of morphemes arranged in sequence, a word form is said to be the result of applying rules that alter a word form or stem in order to produce a new one. An inflectional rule takes a stem, changes it as is required by the rule, and outputs a word form. A derivational rule takes a stem, changes it as per its own requirements, and outputs a derived stem. A compounding rule takes word forms, and similarly outputs a compound stem. Is your word-based morphology. Word-based morphology is usually a word and paradigm approach. The theory takes paradigms as a central notion, instead of stating rules to combine morphemes into word forms or to generate word forms from stems. Word-based morphology states generalizations that hold between the forms of inflectional paradigms. The major point behind this approach is that many such generalizations are hard to state with either of the other approaches. Word and paradigm approaches are also well suited to capturing purely morphological phenomena, such as morphomes. Examples to show the effectiveness of word-based approaches are usually drawn from fusional languages, where a given piece of a word, which a morpheme-based theory would call an inflectional morpheme, corresponds to a combination of grammatical categories. For example, third-person plural morpheme-based theories usually have no problems with this situation, since one says that a given morpheme has two categories. Item and process theories, on the other hand, often break down in cases like these because they all too often assume that there will be two separate rules here, one for third person and the other for plural, but the distinction between them turns out to be artificial. The approaches treat these as whole words that are related to each other by analogical rules. Words can be categorized based on the pattern they fit into. This applies both to existing words and to new ones. Application of a pattern different from the one that has been used historically can give rise to a new word, such as older replacing elder, where older follows the normal pattern of adjectival superlatives, and cows replacing kind, where cows fits the regular pattern of plural formation. Morphological typology. In the 19th century, philologists devised a now classic classification of languages according to their morphology. Some languages are isolating and have little to no morphology. Others are agglutinative, whose words tend to have lots of easily separable morphemes. Others yet are inflectional or fusional because their inflectional morphemes are fused together. That leads to one bound morpheme conveying multiple pieces of information. A standard example of an isolating language is Chinese. An agglutinative language is Turkish, Latin, and Greek are prototypical inflectional or fusional languages. It is clear that this classification is not at all clear-cut, and many languages, Latin and Greek among them, do not neatly fit any one of these types, and some fit in more than one way. A continuum of complex morphology of language may be adopted. The three models of morphology stem from attempts to analyze languages that more or less match different categories in this typology. The item and arrangement approach fits very naturally with agglutinative languages. The item and process and word and paradigm approaches usually address fusional languages, as there is very little fusion involved in word formation. Classical typology mostly applies to inflectional morphology, depending on the preferred way of expressing non-inflectional notions. Languages may be classified as synthetic, using word formation, or analytic, using syntactic phrases. Example: Bengalipese is a Micronesian language, spoken on the Pengalap Atoll and on two of the eastern Caroline Islands, called the High Island of Pohnpei. Similar to other languages, words in Pengalipese can take different forms to add to or even change its meaning. Verbal suffixes are morphemes added at the end of a word to change its form. Monsieur prefixes are those that are added at the front. For example, the Pengalipese suffix can means with or ep. It is added at the end of a verb. Use equals to use to ius can equals to use with mwahu equals to be good to mwahu can equals to be good. Atsa is an example of a verbal prefix. It is added to the beginning of a word and means not p1 equals to be correct to sa p1 equals to be incorrect. There are also directional suffixes that when added to the root word gives the listener a better idea of where the subject is headed. The verb alu means to walk. A directional suffix can be used to give more detail. Da equals up to alu, da equals to walk up, d equals down to alu, d equals to walk down, eng equals away from speaker and listener to alu, eng equals to walk away. Directional suffixes are not limited to motion verbs. When added to non-motion verbs, their meanings are a figurative one. The following table gives some examples of directional suffixes and their possible meanings. Directional suffix: motion verb, non-motion verb. Da up onset of a state, d down action has been completed. La away from change has caused the start of a new state. Doa towards action continued to a certain point in time. Sang from comparative application. Morphology analysis is used in various fields. For example, using morphological features it is possible to assess data quality in Wikipedia in English, Polish, Russian and other language versions. Discourse analysis. Discourse analysis (DA) or discourse studies is the approaches to analyze written, vocal, or sign language use, or any significant semiotic event. The objects of discourse analysis: discourse, writing, conversation, communicative event, are variously defined in terms of coherent sequences of sentences, propositions, speech, or turns of talk. Contrary to much of traditional linguistics, discourse analysts not only study language use beyond the sentence boundary, but also prefer to analyze naturally occurring language use, not invented examples. Text linguistics is a closely related field. The essential difference between discourse analysis and text linguistics is that discourse analysis aims at revealing socio-psychological characteristics of a persons, rather than text structure. Discourse analysis has been taken up in a variety of disciplines in the humanities and social sciences, including linguistics, education, sociology, anthropology, social work, cognitive psychology, social psychology, area studies, cultural studies, international relations, human geography, environmental science, communication studies, biblical studies, and translation studies, each of which is subject to its own assumptions, dimensions of analysis, and methodologies. History. Early use of the term. The ancient Greeks linguistics, among others, had much to say on discourse. However, some scholars consider Austria-born Leo S. Spitzer's Stillstudien, Style Studies, of 1928 the earliest example of discourse analysis. D.A. Michel Foucault translated it into French. However, the term first came into general use following the publication of a series of papers by Zelig Harris from 1952 reporting on work from which he developed transformational grammar in the late 1930s. Formal equivalence relations among the sentences of a coherent discourse are made explicit by using sentence transformations to put the text in a canonical form as your words and sentences with equivalent information then appear in the same column of an array. This work progressed over the next 4 decades. See references into A Science of Sublanguage Analysis, Kittredge and Lehrberger 1982, culminating in a demonstration of the informational structures in texts of a sublanguage of science, that of immunology, Harris et al. 1989, and A Fully Articulated Theory of Linguistic Informational Content, Harris 1991. During this time, however, most linguists ignored such developments in favor of a succession of elaborate theories of sentence-level syntax and semantics. In January 1953, the linguist working for the American Bible